The opinions expressed in the following programming are those of the individual DJ and not necessarily reflective of the CKXU Radio Society as a whole. Listener discretion is advised.
Are you listening? The fact of the matter is, I don't think you're listening to me at all, and that's of great concern.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to The Subject. You're listening to 88.3 CKXU FM, and this is your Friday night programming here on CKXU. My name is Ben Christensen. I'm your host of The Subject, and joining me in studio is my co-host and regular associate, Mr. Thomas Stone.
Good evening, everyone.
And before we get into the program tonight, we are going to just give some clarification on a few points. Normally this would be our segment entitled What Happened, but last week we obviously had a very different experience with our usual radio programming here, and so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. I need to start by clarifying, along with my co-host, that the subject is a controversial program. As such, we discuss issues that some people may take offense to. Emphasis on may. That said, I, again, apologize if you find our programming offensive. If you don't agree with our viewpoints, we apologize for that. But we also advise you that we are trying to maintain a neutral standpoint. We with our program, we present both sides of the arguments for the controversial matter of which we're discussing each week. And with that, we ourselves limit our opinions to maintain neutrality on our program. If, for any reason, you are offended by a viewpoint or a statement that is expressed on our program, I am telling you folks now, you are not being forced to listen to this program. You do have, as is said at the very beginning of the program, listener discretion. And what that means is that if you are bothered by something that is said, don't phone in and tell people not to listen. Don't phone in and complain because you've been offended. Simply put, your listener discretion is advised. The opinions on this program are for the purpose of creating conversation. We welcome it. We want you to talk to us. But, please, if you are bothered by the content of our program, listener discretion is advised. Turn the radio off or change the station. Nobody is holding a gun to your head, forcing you to listen to the program. If you do not like what you hear, change the station, turn the program off. Simply put. But please, do not call in and tell others to stop listening because you're bothered by the subject matter. This is a listener-friendly program. It is. And the purpose of this program is to engage the listening audience. But we will not tolerate callers who want to simply phone in an emotional state to try and discourage other people from participating in the conversation that we have each and every week on this program. So, if you're offended, you have the right to turn it off. Don't call in and tell us that you are offended. Call in and tell us that you have a contradictory opinion. We respect that. We want conversation. But if you're just going to call to tell other people not to listen because you find us offensive, don't bother calling. Period. That said, this week's subject is, again, a controversial one. We are making our best effort to maintain neutrality, and we want you to be engaging in conversation with us. This is why it is a call-in program. You are welcome at any time to call our studio line and express your opinions on the subject matter for the week. All right, how you do that? Our phone number here, 403-329-5189. Call in. Share your opinion with us. We'd like to hear from you. Don't call in and tell everybody else not to listen because you're offended. That's just selfish. And it's uncalled for. You have listener discretion. You can turn the radio off. Not everybody else is going to say things your way. So if you're offended by the program, change the station. Simply put, don't call and tell everyone else that they shouldn't because you're bothered.
I think just to add to this that, there's plenty of radio stations out there that I think personally are quite offensive to myself. Me being an atheist, I am offended by a lot of the content of religious shows. I do not call into those shows and voice my outrage at what I consider to be hate speech from them. Why? Because I already know that I'm going to disagree with them. And it is my right not to listen to them. So it's basically, that's the comparison.
And one other point I'd like to bring up to our listeners, although we do welcome listener engagement, when we are in our final phase, we're wrapping up the show, that is not the time to call. We have an hour-long program that starts at 7 p.m. every Friday night here on CKXU, and it goes until 8 o'clock. If we are saying that it's time to wrap up the show, don't call. You have an hour to do so. The end of the program is not the time. And we will let you know when we're out of time so that you've lost your opportunity to express your feelings.
I think we should just move on to our topic. And I will forewarn people. We've done some promotion on Twitter. For those of you who don't check out Twitter, like I say, this is going to be a very sensitive topic, and we have tried our very best, as always, to present all sides of the argument. Now, I guess without further ado, would you like to introduce our topic here, Ben?
This week, folks, on the subject, we are talking about a very taboo subject. It is a bothersome topic to a lot of people, and we would like to encourage you to call in, to share your opinions, your stories, your experiences, whatever they may be. We are a neutral program. We encourage conversation. We encourage the sharing of opinions. You can call us at 403-329-5189. Without further ado, this week we are talking about abortion. And it is a rather controversial subject for a lot of reasons. It has been the subject of a lot of scrutiny. It has been the subject of a lot of disagreement. You have two sides to every argument. In this case, you have pro-choice, which means that you have the right to choose to have an abortion, and you have pro-life, which is that people who believe that to engage or have an abortion is ending a life, and that is unfair practice to that supposed life form that is being aborted.
Oh, the claim on the anti-abortion side of the equation is that it's an immoral act regardless. And I think that's I mean, obviously, I have my own opinions on it, but I think that there's, like I say, there's always two sides to every controversial discussion, and we're going to do our very best, as always, to present these.
And, obviously, a big part of the controversy, a big part of this whole discussion is that, as my co-host mentioned, it's an unethical or immoral practice. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're going to start this portion of the program with the whole pro-choice segment. Joining us later, we're going to have a pre-recorded interview with a guest who is on the pro-life side of this argument. I have met a lot of people who believe that it is not the least bit wrong to have an abortion, that is a choice that one has to make, and that choice rests upon the birth parent of the child. And in a lot of circumstances, I feel like there would be merit to this sort of practice, because at the end of the day, there are just simply circumstances where a person is not ready to give birth to a child. And whether they choose to put that up for adoption or whether they choose to go the abortion route, at the end of the day, that is their choice. They have the right to choose how they deal with this situation. And I'm not suggesting that this is ethical or correct in all situations. So please, don't get me wrong. What I'm suggesting here is that there are circumstances where I believe that this is appropriate. If a group of teenagers, a young teenage boy and a young teenage girl get together, engage in sexual activity, and somehow the young lady becomes pregnant, obviously, these two teenagers are not ready for a child. Should they be allowed? That, to me, this is my own personal feelings, that's a situation that would allow for that. Because certainly that might create an opportunity where the child could be put up for adoption. But can a 15-year-old girl handle giving birth, or is it more proper and more healthy to simply go the abortion route in that scenario?
I mean, yeah, I think that your point is very valid. I'd also like to point out that we're obviously two men discussing this, but I also would like to say that I think that in this debate there's far too many men out there that are in this debate and not enough women. In my opinion, I think I've seen this debate has raged on for a very long time, and I feel like women are not getting their fair say in this, and this is mostly being debated by the male side, which I think is kind of unfair.
Well, there is the landmark decision. As our later guest mentioned, there's actually the just this week was the anniversary of the landmark decision, which legalized abortion in Canada. And ultimately, I agree somewhat with you, Thomas, that most definitely there is a lot more male involvement that a lot of women probably don't have a say. But that's only because there is a predominant majority of men in the judicial community, in the legal community, in the political community, and very few women who have that opportunity to take a stance on this, empathize with their own gender, and say, I believe in this for this reason, or I don't believe in this for this reason.
True. Yeah, I would agree that the judicial system is, and the political system is primarily male, which I think is I do think that that's it is to me an unfair balance. I think that I believe in equality. I believe that both men and women, all voices on any issue count, and I think that men need to be opening up this discussion to the gender that is primarily affected, which is women.
And well, that being said, I do have to say, though, I believe that there is a lot of opportunity for women to voice their opinions on this, because I would say 98% of the advocacy groups that are either pro-choice or pro-life are predominantly female. So there's a lot of, although the government, judicial systems, and everything else are predominantly male, there is a good I would say 98% majority of women who are part of these advocacy groups, and they're coming from these different positions and weighing in on both sides of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that there's definitely, I know there is a lot of female-led groups that do allow women to discuss this, but I think that, unfortunately, I think the story that I've heard from most women in this debate is that they don't feel like their voice is being heard, and and they don't know how to access groups that will make their voice heard. And I think that is sort of, I mean, there's failures in any system, but I think that we need to make it easier in our society for women to have their voice in this, because they are the ones that are primarily affected by this. Now, I'm not saying that men are completely unaffected, but given that it's a woman's body that we're dealing with, I think that they need a much better and easier opportunity to get their voice heard, and I don't really think that that's happening a lot. And I think we should be opening up more doors for women to voice their concerns and opinions on the issue.
And most definitely, I agree with you, because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is the primary group that is encountering this discussion, that is firsthand experiencing this tough decision, this rationale, this logic, as far as whether or not to proceed. But we've reached a point in our show here where we have to take a little bit of a break, just to let you know about some of the other great programming that's here available on CKXU. So that said, we'll be back in just a moment here, and we will continue to talk about abortion on the subject.
Nice roll.
Community Chest.
What does it say?
Join us from 11 to 12 Saturdays to hear about Lethbridge events and musicians.
You know, people can send us their events and music, right?
That's true. They can send it to us, Rich and Amber, at communitychestckxu@gmail.com. Your turn.
Oh no, Boardwalk.
Haha, pay up, sucker.
We're back here with the subject on 88.3 CKXU FM. And just before our break there, we were talking about the abortion debate, presenting, first of all, the pro-choice side. And as I said, in just a few minutes here, we're going to be actually joining ourselves here with another guest who is going to help us with the sort of pro-life side of this argument. Essentially, what we got talking about here is that this is a very difficult decision for women, whether or not they want to proceed with an abortion, and whether or not they want that life form that's living inside of them to be essentially canceled out. And, of course, as I said, before we get into our special guest portion, we would like to open up the phone lines. And if you've got something to say about the topic, please give us a call. Our phone number here in studio is 403-329-5189. And let us know what you think. We're going to keep on talking here. We've got about 10 minutes before we're going to take a musical break. And after that, we will begin with the interview with our special guest here. As I said, this is a difficult topic, especially for men, because, you know, between me and Thomas, I have to be honest, I have very little insight into this subject. And so it is a very difficult subject for me to really discuss it openly. But the statistics are overwhelming that abortion is something that, in certain circumstances, can be the best choice. And ultimately, that's part of the pro-choice movement, is that the parent who's conceived this child, whether they have that choice or not. For me and my co-host here, I believe we share the view that there are certain circumstances, and one of the ones we'll get into here actually is people who are a byproduct of rape. That's probably one of the greatest and most controversial. It's a difficult area to address without creating and sparking an emotional response from people who are victimized by that act. Myself, I don't support it. I am in no way, shape, or form in support of such behaviors.
Well, from my perspective, I've I've engaged in a lot of conversation on social media in my own friend circles around this issue, and women, a lot of women, especially younger women, feel as though they are being sort of pressured and squeezed into a decision that sometimes even they don't even know a whole lot about it. They end up in that situation, they get violated, and then now they're thrust into a situation and they've got all this immense pressure from both sides of the equation, and they're not really sure how to respond to it, and they feel like, well, one person says I'm being immoral, another person says that I have the right to decide what to do with my body, and it's just like, it's for especially for younger women, it's like they feel like they're going to get judged either way they decide, and it's a double-edged sword.
And I completely agree. This is normally the part of the show where we would take a musical break, but we do have a special guest who we were able to interview earlier this week, and we're just going to play that interview for you because it really helps to shed light on the pro-life side of the argument better than, I guess, myself or my co-host can really do. So we'll tell you a little bit about our guest here. The gentleman is Mr. Jojo Aruba, who is the founder of one of the founders of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, which is essentially a pro-life organization. He's the founder of that organization, and he's also now the founder of another organization entitled Faith Beyond Belief, and very similar aspect to our own with Faith Beyond Belief, that he likes to promote conversation about controversial subjects.
Yeah, he co-founded the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, and he is the executive director now for Faith Beyond Belief.
And so we'd like to welcome to our program Mr. Jojo Aruba, who took the time out of his very busy schedule to join us here in studio on Wednesday evening and spend a few minutes with us. So we'll proceed to let you have the privilege of listening to Mr. Aruba. All right, welcome back to the subject here on 88.3 CKXU FM. I'm your host, Ben Christensen, and joining me in studio is my co-host, Mr. Thomas Stone. Thomas, say hello.
Good evening, everyone, as usual.
And we have this week on our show a very special guest. As you listeners may already know, we are talking this week about abortion, and it's sort of the taboo topic of discussion. But we have a very special guest joining us in studio this week. We have a gentleman by the name of Jojo Aruba, who is the founder of an organization that is a pro-life organization called the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Jojo, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, guys.
And so, Jojo, we'll start by just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the organization, and how you came to be the founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform.
Well, I have to be honest first. I'm no longer with CCBR. They're still friends. We still work together. I work for a Christian organization now called Faith Beyond Belief. But I co-founded CCBR when I was actually a university student at the university in Ottawa called Carleton University. And I started it with other pro-life students from across Canada, really with the heart to help change Canadians' thinking on abortion and to make abortion unthinkable, to really focus back on what the main issue really is on this issue, which is what is the unborn? What is it that we're actually doing when we have an abortion performed? So the genesis of the organization really was to make sure that we can challenge the main thinking on this issue and to get Canadians to realize, hey, it's more than just some of the slogans you hear. There's some really good reasons why the pro-life view makes sense and why it should be acceptable to most Canadians.
Excellent. And as you know, on this program, we try to take sort of a neutral standpoint. Earlier in the program, we were talking a little bit about some of the other side of the argument, the pro-choice portion, and we had some guests who have shared their experiences with us there. Jojo, I guess the first question I have for you, explain to us a little bit about why you're pro-choice and what pro-choice really means.
Well, I actually, in terms of correcting you, people would say, well, you thought you said you were pro-life. Actually, we are pro-choice, and I think all Canadians are pro-choice. The question is, what is that choice that we're pro-choice about?
I think Ben meant to say you're pro-life.
Yes,
so
I do apologize to our listeners there. I did mean to say pro-life, not pro-choice.
Yeah, and I got it, Thomas. Thank you for pointing that out.
I guess that brings up another point. Is maybe we can clarify for the listeners who aren't familiar with that. What is the difference between really the whole pro-choice, pro-life side of the spectrum?
Well, if you want me to explain, obviously I'm a little biased here, but pro-choice people tend to have the position that abortion should be legal throughout all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all. And pro-life people say no, pro-choice people are wrong for wanting that abortion to be legal for any reason, because there are legitimate reasons to protect the life of preborn human beings. So those are the two positions. But as I was clarifying, I think it's fair to say that all Canadians are pro-choice. We're pro-choice about what kind of articles of clothing you wear, what car you want to buy. We're pro-choice about even who you marry, for the most part. The question is the choice that we make, are those choices absolute? Can we choose to do whatever we want? And clearly that's not possible. That's why we have laws in Canada. Laws limit the choices that we make if the choices we make harm someone else. And the pro-life position is very simple. It says this, look, though we respect the right of women to control their own bodies, though we respect the right to choose, respect women's equality, no one has the right to choose to harm someone else. And in this situation, we're talking about a new human being that's growing inside a woman who isn't that woman. And therefore, it's wrong to harm that child, just as it would be wrong to choose to harm a born person.
So, I mean, I myself, like I say, I come at it from obviously, I'm pro-choice, and I do readily admit that I would agree that abortion, the idea of abortion itself, is quite ugly. I'm not in any way trying to dismiss that. However, so I guess you would hold the view that there is no circumstances whatsoever where an abortion would be seen as, the thing to do.
Well, I guess what circumstances would you be talking about, Thomas?
Well, I mean, let's address the elephant in the room. Would you say that all women of rape should be forced to have their child against their wishes?
Well, again, it goes back to how do we treat people who are conceived through rape? One of my friends, Rebecca Kiesling, was conceived through rape. She didn't find this out until her 20s. And when she finally contacted her birth mother, the first phone call that they had, her birth mother remembered the rape and remembered the trauma of the rape. But because she was legitimately feeling that way, did she have a right to kill Rebecca at 20 years old? Well, most people would say, well, no, we don't kill people who are conceived through rape because they're not the criminals. The criminals are the rapists. And so in the situation when it comes to rape, the child conceived in rape is just as much of a victim as the mother. So why should we punish that child through abortion?
No, I'm going to ask sort of a different question here, sort of a provocative question. When you refer to the child of rape and the child who's a byproduct of that, there is a lot of, obviously, I've never been a victim, probably you've never been a victim, but for the people who are victim to that, there is a lot of emotional trauma, as well as a lot of emotional resentment and anger that can brew and or stem from that sort of activity. And I guess the byproduct of that, I know that there's a lot of circumstances where mothers who have given birth to their child who is a byproduct of rape end up having a lot of resentment and even hatred towards that child because of the appearance, because of the genetic construct that made up that child, because of the resemblance to the perpetrator of that crime. And for them, in addition to that resentment, it also brings up a lot of emotional response because of the resemblance in many cases. It triggers post-traumatic stress in reaction to that trauma.
Yeah, and you know what, Ben? Can I just say I agree with you completely? And I don't think, forgive me if I came off across that way, but I don't want to at all delegitimize or minimize the result of what rape does to women in particular. I mean, men are rapists as well. I've never been, and I can never say that I can perfectly identify with that. And we have to make sure that rape victims are very much protected, they're treated, they're helped. We have to show that we're not callous to what they're going through, for sure. All of that I agree with. But then going back to the main question that I mentioned when we started, when I introduced myself, really the point is, just because someone has been victimized and has gone through a terrible tragedy that is heartbreaking and we should all sympathize, does that give them a right to take someone else's life, particularly their child? Because if what you're saying is true, and it is true, and I don't want to say if it is true, that women who give birth to a child who is conceived through rape often feel that resentment, the law still doesn't allow them to kill that born child, because the law states that that child is an innocent person as well. So it really goes back to then the question that really matters here is, what is it that we're killing through abortion? And it isn't my religion or my Bible that tells me that the preborn child is a human being. It's my biology textbook that tells me that anything that reproduces sexually begins life at fertilization. Who we are is biologically defined at fertilization, when the sperm meets the egg. So when we talk about that, we recognize that biology, then we have to recognize that abortion takes the life of an innocent human being.
I guess from my perspective, I know that the alternative, adoption and measures like that, that the adoption system and overall system as far as getting babies who are born to unprepared mothers, someone to raise them, is an issue in this country. And because that system is in so much disarray, I'm not saying that an unborn child is nothing. However, I would also say that to me, I admit it's ugly. I'm not going to dismiss that. However, I would almost see it as better, from my perspective, to have the child aborted and not face the horrible judgment from society and potentially the completely upside down adoption system that we have in this country, because it's far from perfect.
Right.
It's almost, to me, it's almost better to just abort it and and cry tears over their grave and meet them in sort of in the spiritual realm, than to put them through the horrors of the system and the detachment they're going to have from their parents, because chances are they're not even going to. Not every child that actually does get through the system is going to feel good about it, and not every child is going to have a positive relationship with their biological parents, right? So how do you address that?
Well, and again, I agree with you. The systems we have are imperfect. And there's a lot of situations where people are adopted or go to foster homes, and they're not good homes. My aunt was a foster mom for many, many years. And she was a foster mom who, some of those kids who went through with her, they still call her mom. That's how close they were to her. So there are good foster moms. There are also good adoptive.
I'm not discounting that there are.
But here's the point that I think that's important to raise. So I'm agreeing with you that there's bad situations. But do those bad situations justify killing born children in that situation? Can we go to a 2-year-old child who's in a bad foster home and shoot her in the head because she's going to have a bad life? Because if that's the standard we're going to use, then we should go to every third world country and kill children there who are going to have a bad life. But that's what being pro-choice actually really means. It's not up to us to determine someone else's life. It's up to their lives. And a true pro-choice person would say they have a right to choose to live. We can't take that life away.
And so that leads me to a question. I mean, going back to what we were talking about as far as your application or your statement of once the fertilization process commences, that is a life form. I mean, there's all kinds of different circumstances where a child is conceived, whether it be by rape, whether it be by a couple who engages in sexual activity. It wasn't planned, but it happened because they failed to use protection. I mean, there's all kinds of circumstances where this sort of thing occurs.
Of course.
And at the end of the day, I see the standpoint you're coming from, but I have to ask the question as far as let's go to a different scenario here, and let's just say that we've got now 2 teenage children who engaged in sexual activity. One of them ends up pregnant at 14, 15 years old. That child is still a child themselves. They're obviously and very clearly not ready for the responsibility that is parenthood. And so I guess I asked the question, what circumstances, if any, would justify the means of, I guess, going for the abortion route versus putting the child up for adoption?
Well, and again, I don't want to sound unsympathetic because you're absolutely right. That is a horrible situation to be in. And no one wants to be able to say, the situation that you're in you should take it glibly or lightly. That's not the case at all. But that's not what we're saying. We're acknowledging that's a difficult situation. But in difficult situations, do we have a right to kill our offspring? That goes back to that main question, right? If you were in a situation where you were poor, you had lost your job, and you had 2 little kids at home, one was 5 and one was 1 year old, that doesn't give you a right to smother your 1-year-old child because he's probably going to suffer more than the 5-year-old. Right? That doesn't make sense. And no one is justified in doing that in Canadian law. So all we're saying is, look, if we accept the biology, which, there really is no other case for, it's biologically fact that human life begins at that point, then we have to acknowledge that all the human rights that exist for born people should also exist for preborn ones because they're human beings.
Well, would you? You're saying that it wouldn't be justified in pretty much in any case to kill the unborn.
I'm saying it's not justified for any other case to kill born people. It should be the same for preborn if they're people too.
Okay, but would you consider it justified to go to somebody who was conceived in rape, who was raised by the foster system, who has quite potentially addiction problems, resentment issues? Would you consider it justified to go to that person and say, well, it wasn't right to kill you, so you should just sort of suck it up? Because I've met quite a few people in my lifetime who have been in this scenario, and they don't feel it's justified of the pro-life side of the equation to basically tell them that they should basically essentially just suck it up and move on, essentially.
Can I just say, if any pro-life person has ever said that, then my apologies. We would never say just suck it up. We have pro-life people who've been in those very same situations. One of the pro-life speakers, Ryan Blomberg, I think his last name, was conceived through rape. He's biracial. I think the rapist was of a different race than his birth mother. But he was adopted by a large family with different races. And one of the things I love what he says is he is not defined by how he's conceived. He's defined by what he chooses to do with his life that's been given to him. And I would say the same thing. No one would ever say, just suck it up. No, part of what we are is all the pain as well as all the good things in life. And the question isn't, should we ignore those difficult situations? Not at all. We have to acknowledge they happen. The question is, what do we do with them? Do we become better people, or are we gonna wallow in them? Are we gonna choose to do harm? I think some of the greatest people in history are people who've gone through difficulties and have chosen to do good anyway. And that's my point. It's their life, not ours. We should not have a right to choose to take away their life just because they came from a difficult background.
And I think that is a very valid point. We're going to take a brief break from the program here. For those of you just joining the program, you're listening to The Subject. We're talking about abortion this week with our special guest, Mr. Jojo Ruba, who is joining us prior to tonight's episode in studio here at the CKXU studios. We'll be back in just a moment with more on this subject.
Get your CKXU Friends card for great deals and discounts at places around Lethbridge, such as
receive a 10% discount at the Penny Coffee House, located 331 5th Street South. The gathering place for good food, fine coffee, and friendly faces.
For more details, visit ckxu.com.
Formerly the president and founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform and the organization Faith Beyond Belief. He's joining us in studio today, and we're talking a little bit about the pro-life / pro-choice debate and abortion. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about the circumstances, and we're going to sort of continue from there. So I believe Thomas had a question for our guest here, and I'm going to let him take it from there.
Yes, I mean, I've been keeping a track of this issue probably just as much as you have, Jojo. But in all fairness, to make sure that all views are represented and asked, there has been quite some controversy surrounding the graphic imagery of the pro-life advertising and the advertising of their view, and I know many people have been saying that that they should tone it down, and that they, I know the pro-life side of it, they're saying that they do that in some ways intentionally because it's that serious of an issue to them, and I'm not dismissing that, but to get these people's this view fairly represented, how do you see? Do you think that there's any way to come to some sort of a happy medium on it so that you're not outright offending the public, but still getting your message across?
Well, that's a very good question, Thomas. I think there is a lot of advice we've been getting from marketing gurus and others about how not to be offensive to the public, but that goes contrary to what the pro-life movement is about. In fact, every civil rights movement, every movement in the past that's fought for rights, whether it's for African Americans, for women, even the gay lesbian movement, all of them have been offensive to the majority culture of the time that they're trying to change. That's why the culture doesn't want to change according to what those advocates want to do. The only way for them to cause change, these advocates to cause change, is to bring a message that's truthful, but will automatically be offensive to people who don't want to change. So the standard we use is not whether our message is offensive. The standard we should use is whether our message is true. Hey, think about it. When we talk about PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, one of the key things they do is show graphic images, graphic videos of animals being mistreated. When we talk about Greenpeace, one of the first kind of ads they bought were very beautiful pictures of forests and trees, and no one paid attention. So when they started showing clear cuts and areas that were completely devastated by the lumber industry, then people started saying, oh my goodness, this is terrible. So when we talk about abortion, I think it's very fair to be able to say, look, you believe in choice. That's fine. Understand this. As Canadians, you pay for that choice through our tax dollars and our health care. Therefore, you should actually see the result of what that choice looks like. And frankly, like you said, it isn't just ugly. It's very disturbing to understand that abortion actually decapitates, disembowels, and dismembers a member of the human family. And that is going to be disgusting because the act is disgusting.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I try to see the issue in all fairness, but I guess, from coming up from the pro-choice side of the equation, sorry, forgive me here. I just think that, I mean, I'm all for controversy because I believe it, I like controversy. I think controversy creates conversation, and conversation creates change. That's my motto. I mean, you know that. I just think that, I've just heard many earfuls from people who are so taken aback by these ads that they say, there's got to be some other way to do it. And I completely understand where you're coming at it from and your view. I think that I just think that I personally would say that I think that you probably could strike a better balance. I think that in some ways just a suggestion, but I think you may be actually turning people completely off of any discussion just because of the way you go about promoting it. I mean, that's just my critique, but other people would have their own opinions on it.
Ben, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was actually going to throw in a question there. Thomas does bring up a point that a lot of these anti-abortion ads and these pro-life ads are, without a doubt, very graphic in nature, and definitely there is a lot of people that would find that offensive or find that to be distasteful. I guess my sort of sentiments on it, I maintain some degree of neutrality here. And for me, although I'm not as hypersensitive to it as some people might find themselves being, is there a way that these organizations, these pro-life organizations, can convey the message in a non-violent, non-graphic context, something that's basically not so intrusive but still conveys the purpose of the message they're trying to convey?
Well, let me first differentiate between violent and graphic, because you can show graphic images and not be violent. And any organization I've been involved with have always spoken out against violence of any kind, including against abortion doctors, against women, against preborn children. So we don't support violence in any way. That being said, I wish, just like you, that we wouldn't have to do that. You make it sound a little bit. I know you're not trying to be difficult here, but you have to understand no one wants to be hated. We don't want to go out there in the cold holding signs. We'd rather be inside giving lectures. But as someone who's been involved in the pro-life movement since I was 13, I can tell you I've been involved. We advertise lectures, we advertise talks and debates and presentations and all those kinds of things. So we have tried all of those, and we still do those things to complement the work we do. But in terms of actually engaging the general public and getting them to talk about what abortion really is, there's nothing like actually showing what abortion does to the public. Look, if we could get a yearly event where at every movie theater across Canada, they would listen to a pro-life debate on abortion where we could show the graphic images, the pro-choice side can come to, and we'd actually discuss the issue, we wouldn't have to be on the streets. There's no need to. But that's the point. The average Canadian doesn't want to talk about it. They'd rather ignore it. They'd rather cover up the choice of abortion using very nice veneer of words. They don't even want to discuss what the unborn child is. They call it products of conception. Well, we're all products of conception, if you think about it. We're just a little older than the unborn. So the difference isn't that we're trying to advertise something and to make ourselves popular. We don't mind being hated as long as the message is being discussed. And back to your point, Thomas, yeah, there might be people who say, well, you're just making me want to shut down or not talk to you. That's okay, as long as you're thinking about it. So that next time you talk about abortion, you're no longer talking about choice. You're associating the word choice with what's actually chosen. And that's a success to us.
I guess, I would say, would you be prepared, though, because, I mean, when you... I respect freedom of expression. I firmly believe in that. However, I also respect the fact that, even Ben and I on the show, we are very controversial, and we've received quite a bit of criticism for our views, and I expect that because we are so bold in our views.
Can I just say, good for you. I'm glad you're bold in your views.
Thank you. Well, that's what we strive for. But my question would be, would you, I would say that it should be an expectation on your part then, if you believe that is the way that you have to advertise in order to get the point across. You would at some point have to expect that some people are going to go out there and make signs saying, down with religion or down with pro-lifers, a message of hate in return, because they see you as spreading a message of hatred against women. I'm not saying that is your view, but it would just be as justified on their part if they were to start making offensive signs in return.
Well, can I just say it this way? We have had people from different organizations, different companies, different cities even trying to ban the pro-life message. No pro-life politician or pro-life activist that I've known has ever advocated for silencing or censoring pro-choice activism. None. So, we expect that. That's great. We have great debate. In fact, to be perfectly honest with you, here's an example. We were doing a pro-life display in Calgary, and we were near the Calgary Sexual Health Center, the Planned Parenthood. It used to be Planned Parenthood. And when we were holding our signs there, two people from the Planned Parenthood office came out. One was dressed like a giant vagina, and the other one was dressed like a giant penis. And they were holding signs and they were protesting against us. But that actually got more people wondering what's going on. Why are there walking genitalia on the streets? So that actually attracted more people to us. And that's why we actually love it when protesters show up.
Well, you know what? I guess at the end of the day, sometimes it pays to be a big dick.
That could be one way you say it, man. Yes.
Yes. But I guess that brings us to sort of and this is kind of the last question before we wrap things up here. But, being pro-life or pro-life or pro-choice, whichever you prefer as definition. I seem to be screwing this up consistently. But yeah, I guess being sort of on the pro-life side of things. What have you been, I guess, some of your experiences in dealing with that, and how have those experiences, I guess, even what experiences have led you to your viewpoint and made you passionate about, I guess, this side of the argument?
Well, if you, excuse me, if you think about any civil rights movement in history, what really shows is that civil rights, human rights, are often ones that have to be fought for. And fighting meaning not violence or anything, but especially in democratic countries, someone has to speak out. And when it comes to this issue, it's unfortunate, but the victims, particularly the preborn children, can't speak, can't talk about it. Women who've had abortions who now realize what they've done can. But also people like us, ordinary people, men and women, and yes, actually, it's mostly women who lead this movement. A lot of people criticize me for being male, and I always remind them, look, reproduction takes two, unfortunately. And so we need to be able to have both a conversation on this.
And I can see that there really is no such thing as a male abortion.
No, well, and part of it, too, is ultimately the pro-life view says this. If human children before birth are children, that means both the mother and the father have legal responsibility for that child. So that means paternity payments would have to start before birth, right, among other things. So there'll be equality in that kind of stage. It's obviously more responsibility for the woman, but ultimately it's our responsibility as a society to provide protection for everybody. And I guess when I see where I came from, I was bullied as a kid. I had no one to advocate for me. I was the only Filipino kid in my school, and I felt really lonely. And I realized that whenever I got the chance to speak out, I would like to be able to speak out for the underdog. And that's what we're doing here. Ultimately, if you look through the arguments of both sides, you have to address what is it that you're killing in an abortion before you can say that you're pro-choice about it. And our opponents who are pro-choice, they always skirt the issue. When the decision that's celebrated today, the 27th anniversary of the Morgenthaler decision, that struck down any restrictions on abortion or protections for the preborn, is how I would say it, actually said Parliament still has a right to determine where abortion can be restricted, particularly later in pregnancy. But no law has ever been made at all since then. For 27 years, Canada has been one of the few countries in the world, even the more liberal European countries like France and the Netherlands, have protections for preborn children later in pregnancy. Canada has zero, like China or North Korea. That means any child can be aborted for any reason or for no reason at all, and Canadian taxpayers get to pay for it. But it reminds me of, why I do this work? It reminds me of a young woman named Julie. She was a nursing student when she first saw our graphic images, and she threw all the abortion arguments, the pro-choice, pro-abortion arguments at us. And she was very adamant about it. But because of what we were saying, focusing back on what is it that abortion actually does, she went back home and did her own research. She investigated fetal development. She's a nurse, she's a nursing student, right? She did the science, she did the ethics, she did the morality. 3 years later, she came back to us and she said, you know what? You so offended me 3 years ago that I had to go back and do my own research. And when that happened, I realized you were right. And she said, thank you for being willing to offend people like me so that I can find the truth. And that's ultimately why we do this job, because you and I all benefit when every Canadian, every person in our society is protected. Whether you're brown or white, male or female, gay or straight, born or unborn, all of us deserve legal protection under the law, and that's why I'm pro-life.
That is excellent. Thank you very much, Jojo, for that. We've reached the end of our allotted time frame here, so we'd like to thank you, Jojo, for joining us in studio here, taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be a guest on our program. And I can't thank you enough, expressing my gratitude for the privilege of your company here today.
Can I also say thank you? It's been great. Anytime. Do you mind if I plug our website as well? Would that be okay?
Quite all right.
So you can check out my former organization's website at unmaskingchoice.ca, unmaskingchoice.ca. They'd welcome criticisms as well. So if you want to call their phone number, they have a hotline. We also have my website now, which is the organization I work for called faithbeyondbelief.ca. So that's unmaskingchoice.ca and faithbeyondbelief.ca.
Excellent. And again, we'd like to thank you for joining us on the program here, Jojo, taking the time out of your very busy schedule. And it has been an absolute privilege.
It's been awesome.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in this week on 88.3 CKXU for the subject. That was an interview with, again, Mr. Jojo Ruba, the co-founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, and the current acting organizer and coordinator for Faith Beyond Belief. We'd again like to thank Jojo for his contribution to this week's program and for helping promote insights to this particular subject. Make sure that if you're listening, that you join the conversation. We're available on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, and how you do that is very easy. You can join us by looking up at the subject CKXU, or by using hashtag #MoreThanTalkRadio, all one word. And that is how you can communicate with us, the hosts of the subject here at CKXU. Let us know how you're feeling about the things we're talking about. Let us know if you've got a subject you'd like us to talk about.
Please, we would like suggestions.
We are, again, a listener interactive program. That means that you, the listener, have the ability to call in, tweet in, and engage us as the hosts on the topics that we're discussing each and every week, because that is the objective of this program, is to get people talking and to help facilitate communication in the community with the subjects that we are normally afraid to address. That said, we'd like to thank you for joining our program, and we'll be here again next week and every other week. Friday night, 7 p.m., 88.3 CKXU FM. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.